It's part 6 of the video series, and I started off by fixing the wheel speed sensor issue at the back, replacing the reluctor rings, and after that I headed to the track. Now, fixing the reluctor ring issue turned out to be harder than I expected. Pretty much the entire rear suspension had to come apart to change that. The older reluctor rings had just rusted off, so that's why they needed to be changed. So yeah, 3 of my friends came and they helped me out with it, and it took us all night. We spent all night changing the reluctor rings, and then the next day, without any sleep, we headed to the track, which wasn't the best idea, but here's how it worked out. Alright, so we are at Toronto Motorsport Park today, and we're gonna find out all the changes we've done to the E55, how well they've worked. There's a lot of traffic on track, so I'm gonna go out there, see if I can get some good laps in and see how everything is working. Now, just to quickly sum up all the changes we've made to the car since the previous track day. In part 2 we added brake cooling ducts, because on the last track day the car had a major brake overheating issue. It wore out the pads completely in just one track day. In part 3 we got rid of the airmatic suspension and added front coilovers. We also added a bit of camber to the front. That's because on the previous track day the car was chewing an awful lot of front tire, the outer edge of the front tire. In part 4 we added the pushrod suspension at the back, and in part 5 we welded a diff. And now it's time to find out how well all these changes have worked. So at first, when I went on the track, I think I gave it a bit too much power on cold tires, and that made the tires spin an awful lot in first gear. But after that, the tires caught up to temperature pretty quickly. I guess it was a warm day, it was 28 degrees. Oh, by the way, that whining noise at the back was the brake backing plate touching the rear brake rotors. We assembled everything at the back just in one night, so we had to screw up on something. But it wasn't a big issue anyways, it was just the backing plate touching the rotor. So the first impressions of the car was it felt really quick. It was a completely different car. On the last track day it had a lot of understeer. This time the balance was just perfectly neutral. So it felt really quick through the corners. That was a 370Z Nismo in front, I think. And just judging by how quickly I caught up to that car in the corners, you can just imagine how fast it was through the corners. Especially for a big Mercedes, it was just flying through the corners. So for the first couple of laps I was braking really early, and I wasn't pushing the car to its full limit, obviously, because this was just the car we put together last night, so I wasn't even sure if it was gonna work. But it all worked out fine. And once I gained a bit more confidence in the car after a few laps, I started pushing it a bit more. But there was just an awful lot of traffic on track, and the rules on the track are that if there's any car in front of you, you can't just pass it, you have to wait for the car to signal you, and then you can overtake. So basically, if any car comes in front of you, your lap is ruined. You can't set a good lap if someone comes in front of you. And when you're in a car that's pretty much 10 or 15 seconds faster than everyone else on track, it's really hard to not find traffic on track. So basically, yeah, it was pretty much impossible finding a clean lap where there was no traffic. So around the third lap I caught up to this red BMW, which was pretty interesting because it was an old BMW 335i, and it said at the back it was a 335. But I was just looking at it and I was like, this is way too fast for a 335 because it was just flying down the streets. I was struggling to catch up to it. But later on I found out that it was actually 335 with the swapped engine. It had an LS engine in it, a V8 engine. So that's why it was a fair bit faster than it should have been. On the first stint I did, I think, 6 laps in total. And then after that the supercharger completely just cut out. When I looked at my intake air temperatures, they were at around 90 degrees. And the supercharger was heat soaking, which wasn't a problem before, but I guess today was a warm day, that's why it was more of a problem. And what I did was I didn't do a cool down lap, I just pulled off the track, which wasn't a good idea because if you look right above the steering wheel there's a bit of smoke coming out of the brake rotor. But the brake cooling ducts did make a big difference. This time there was no brake fade at all. The brakes were perfectly fine. And another good advantage of the brake cooling ducts was that every time I pulled off the track, I would just use a leaf blower and I would just connect it to where the brake duct inlets were, and it would just blow cool air onto the discs, and that cooled down the disc really quickly. I was measuring the temperatures, and when I would come off the track, the front discs would be around 420 degrees or 460 degrees if I didn't do a cool down lap. If I did a cool down lap, they would be around 400 degrees. And using the leaf blower, within 5 minutes it would just come down to 100 degrees, so the car was good to go back on the track. So that turned out to be a really good idea. Another thing that worked out really well was the rear pushrod suspension. It was just amazing the difference it made in the balance of the car. Originally when I made the suspension, I put the coils all the way on the top of the rocker, so it was at the stiffest setting. But that had taken the car's balance from understeer to oversteer, so I had to dial it back a little, and I moved the coil springs a little farther down the rocker, and that worked out perfectly because the balance this time was just perfectly neutral. The car wouldn't slide too much under braking, but under acceleration you could slide it, so you had to be a little careful while accelerating the car, but the cornering speeds were just much higher than last time. I looked at the videos, the comparison from the previous videos to this video, and on a few of the corners I could see the speedo where it was, and there was about a 15 to 20 kilometer per hour difference in the corner, so that's a huge difference. So this was one of the quicker laps I recorded on camera. The thing was, I kept on lapping into the night, but my camera stopped recording because it ran out of batteries. So that's why I didn't record the whole thing, but anyways, this was one of the better laps I did record. It wasn't a good lap, but it was just that there was no traffic, so that's why the time was a little better than for the other laps. So yeah, you can see the G-force meter on the top right of the screen, and it was pretty incredible the G-forces the car was going to, because in a car this heavy you usually don't expect it to go outside the 1G circle, but it was making it out of that circle pretty easily. The maximum G-forces it was going to was 1.4, but I guess that was the maximum. The average was probably a little lower, 1.1 or 1.2 G, I would say. I guess I was pushing it a little too much this lap, that's why the car was snapping a little. But it was just that it was frustrating because of all the traffic. I would get maybe one clean lap out of 10 laps, so that one lap I wanted to push it, but I was pushing it a bit too much. Right around this point, the supercharger cut out because the intake temperatures had gone too high. And when the supercharger cuts out, you immediately feel the difference. It goes from being a 500 horsepower car to maybe a 300 horsepower car. So there's just no power at all. It feels really bad when that happens. So the lap time I got this lap was 121.7, which was a little disappointing to me because the car felt a lot faster than that. I thought it should have been faster than that because the lap times I got last time were 122.5. So the car definitely felt more than a second quicker than last time. But I realized the problem when I looked at my previous lap, when I compared the videos from my previous track day to this track day. And what was happening was that I was gaining a lot of time through the corners, but I was losing time through the straights because the engine wasn't making the right power it should be making. And that was because of the intake air temperatures. The last time I went on the track, the outside temperature was only 9 degrees, so the engine temperature and the intake temperatures were staying a lot cooler, which is why the engine was making its proper power. This time the intake temperatures were just way too high. They were around 80 or 90 degrees. That's way too high for the supercharged car, and that's why the car was cutting out the supercharger on a few of the laps, and on other laps the intake temperatures were high enough anyways that it wasn't making the full power. So I think I didn't see the lap times I was expecting to see. Later on in the night, when the temperatures did cool down, and maybe I improved my driving a little bit too, I was seeing 120.9 lap times, which still wasn't as good as I expected. I was expecting maybe low 120s, but I guess it was because of the supercharger issue, because the intake temperatures were just way too high. Another cool thing that happened was that I met up with these two BMW guys. They've been racing at the CSCS for I think 2 or 3 years now. CSCS is the event I'm going to be going to. That's what I'm preparing the E55 for. It's a time attack. CSCS is for Canadian Sports Compact Series. And that black BMW on the side, he's been winning that event for the past 1 or 2 years, I think. It's a pretty modified BMW. It's 700 wheel horsepower or something, some insane number like that. It's pretty intense. And yeah, it was pretty cool to meet up with those guys. They were really helpful. They gave me a few good tips on how to improve the lap times, and I told them I was getting 121s that day, and first they didn't believe me. They were like, there's no way a heavy E class is going to be getting 121s, because they were getting 120s that day. So I said, okay, I'll borrow your lap timer and we'll see what the car gets according to their lap timer. And I took their lap timer then and I went out again. Unfortunately, the cameras didn't work that time, but my phone still kept recording the audio, so I still have the audio from that.
You got that?
No, I think it was 121.77.
120.1?
121.77.
So it's 120.97, yeah.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, that's fucking quick.
It had a mistake. I couldn't get any laps in because every time I went, someone blocked me. So.
Oh, that sucks.
Yeah.
You're very quick, man. You can definitely do CSCS.
That's good to hear. But I was still a little disappointed because I knew there was more time to be gained, but because of that overheating issue and all that, I couldn't really get to those lap times. But it was still pretty cool meeting up with them. Later on, I'm going to be competing with these guys at the CSCS, which is in pretty much 3 weeks from now. So that's going to be pretty fun. I'm not hoping to win the CSCS this time because the car is just not modified enough to win it. People that win the CSCS, they've spent maybe 2 years or something just modifying their cars, and they have insane numbers like 600 wheel horsepower, and they do a lot to their cars to make it win. I'm just planning to be competitive this time, maybe be within 2 seconds of the winning lap times, and if I'm around there, then next year I'm gonna do all these engine modifications and turbocharging the car, all that, because right now the engine is pretty close to stock. All the modifications I've made have been to the suspension and other things. So yeah, once the engine modifications are done, hopefully it's gonna be a pretty fast car. Okay, so it's night at Toronto Motorsport Park now. We've gotten a few laps in. We didn't get an awful lot because there was just way too much traffic on the track. But well, the changes have definitely worked. The push rod suspension made a big difference. The welded diff, you know, you can just put the power down on corner exit and it just goes. You just gotta be careful not to take the rear end out too much, so that's the only problem. But yeah, the lap times, I was hoping I would beat a 120, but I didn't get it. I guess it's because of the heat soak issue, because we can't get a single lap in without the heat soak kicking in. By the end of the lap, it's always cutting off the power, so that's why I guess I'm losing a bit of time there. But yeah, I guess we'll probably work out something with the cooling, put a bigger intercooler pump or something maybe, and improve the cooling and then try again. I'm pretty sure we can get the 120s. We just need the right conditions, and even if the weather was a bit colder, I think we might have gotten it. So looking at the car after the track day, the car actually took a lot better care of the tires this time. I guess because this time the balance was better, so it wasn't going through so much understeer and then going so aggressive on the power to make the most out of the corner exits. Also the cambers at the front, I guess they helped because now the outer edge of the tire was not as worn out as it was on the last track day. And the big difference was the brakes. This time there was hardly any brake pad wear at all. Last time the pads were completely worn after the track day because of the brakes overheating. This time the pads were new before and they're still pretty much new. So that's pretty good. The brake wear both at the back, the brake overheating issue wasn't as much as a problem, but at the front it made a big difference. Now I don't have to replace a set of brake pads every track day, so that's pretty good. So that's it for part 6. And now we're only pretty much 3 weeks away from the CSCS, which is the first time attack the E55 is going to be competing in. And the problem is we still have to make a few changes to the car in order to meet the regulations. It has to be fitted with the roll cage. And the other thing is I want to install this intercooler radiator to hopefully get rid of the heat soak issue, because if it does that on the CSCS, that's going to be pretty bad. So I'm planning to maybe double the intercooling by adding another intercooler radiator. Yeah, that's it for this part. I'll see you in part 7.